The human being has always sought answers about their existence, about their purpose, and above all, about the meaning of their own identity. In this process of self-discovery, many end up trapped in patterns of toxic relationships, energies that drain, and situations that seem to repeat over and over again, as if they were part of an inescapable destiny. But what if I told you that all of this has a deeper explanation? Carl Jung dedicated his life to understanding the mysteries of the unconscious, and one of the most powerful discoveries he left us is that the outer world is a reflection of our inner world. Perhaps you've experienced this. You feel that no matter how hard you try to be a good person, to help others, to give love, you always end up surrounded by people who seem to take advantage of your energy, who manipulate you, or who simply leave you feeling empty. It's as if a part of you, without realizing it, attracts the very dynamics you'd like to avoid. But this is where Jung invites us to look beyond the surface. The reality we experience is not a mere collection of coincidences, but a direct manifestation of what dwells in our unconscious. When a person doesn't truly love themselves, their energy emits a frequency that others perceive, even without realizing it. Jung speaks to us about the concept of the shadow, that hidden part of ourselves that we've repressed, ignored, or denied because it doesn't fit the image we want to project. And here comes the most striking part. That shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. Everything you reject about yourself seeks to express itself somehow, and the most common way it does so is through the people you attract into your life. Imagine that inside you there's a silent voice constantly repeating, "I'm not enough. I don't deserve love. I need to prove my worth." That voice isn't something you can silence with simple positive affirmations or the hope that someone else will quiet it. That voice manifests in how you treat yourself and in how you allow others to treat you. If deep down you believe you need to strive to be loved, you'll attract people who reinforce that belief, relationships that demand constant sacrifices and never make you feel fully accepted. But here's the key. Genuine self-love isn't about motivational phrases or trying to convince yourself that you're worthwhile. The true self-love that Jung invites us to develop emerges when you start integrating your shadow, when you stop running from those parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. You can't heal something you're not willing to see, and most people spend their lives trying to hide their wounds instead of healing them. The process of integrating the shadow can be uncomfortable because it means facing everything you've tried to avoid. It means recognizing that many of the relationships you've had weren't the result of bad luck, but of an internal programming that led you to seek them out, even if unconsciously. But here comes the most powerful part. When you start truly loving yourself, you don't need to do anything for the dark people to step away. It happens naturally. Think about this. People who feed off others' energy, who manipulate, who control, or who simply seek to exploit someone else's insecurity, can't sustain themselves in the presence of someone who has integrated their shadow. They're like predators looking for easy prey, but when they sense that a person is whole within themselves, without voids they can exploit, they simply walk away, not because you reject them, but because they can no longer get what they're after. Real self-love is an invisible but powerful shield. It's not arrogance, it's not pride, it's not a defense mechanism. It's a vibration so strong and stable that anyone not on that frequency simply can't stay by your side. And this is where the magic happens. When you begin to truly love yourself, the right people, those aligned with your essence, start to appear. Not because you're desperately seeking them, but because you've shifted your energy in such a way that only those who resonate with it can remain in your life. But how can you reach that point? Jung taught us that the first step is self-awareness. You can't transform something you don't understand. So it's essential that you start observing yourself with honesty. Ask yourself, what kind of relationships have I been attracting? What patterns keep repeating in my life? What parts of myself have I been repressing? There are no good or bad answers, only truths you need to uncover to set yourself free. As you begin this process of self-exploration, you'll notice resistances. The mind tends to cling to what's familiar, even if what's familiar is painful. But here lies the challenge. You must be willing to cross that threshold of discomfort to access a new version of yourself. And when you do, when you truly start inhabiting your own being without fear or shame, the outer world will begin to reflect that change. Toxic relationships dissolve, not because you force them to disappear, but because there's no longer an anchor inside you holding them in place. It's as if you've changed the frequency of your radio. You no longer tune into the same signal as before, and so the interference vanishes. And this is where true transformation happens. You start attracting what's truly aligned with you, not because you're desperately searching for it, but because you've created the inner space for it to arrive. This is the true power of self-love according to Jung. When you stop being a reflection of your unresolved wounds, the world stops treating you as such. You don't need to convince anyone to value you. You don't need to beg for love, friendship, or respect. You only need to become someone who gives that to themselves naturally. And in that moment, the dark people step away on their own because there's nothing left in you to sustain them. When you begin working on your inner self and developing a genuine relationship with yourself, the world starts responding in a completely different way. It's not just a matter of a positive attitude or repeating motivational phrases in front of the mirror. It's something much deeper. It's a shift in how you vibrate, how you perceive yourself, and how that perception shapes the reality you experience. Carl Jung spoke of the importance of individuation, the process through which a person becomes who they truly are, integrating all aspects of their being, even those they've been taught to reject. And here's a key point. When you know and accept yourself fully, you stop being vulnerable. It's impossible for someone to control a person who no longer seeks external validation, who doesn't need others to confirm their worth because they've found it within themselves. Think of all the times you've let someone cross your boundaries. Maybe it was out of fear of being alone, the belief that you had to be understanding, or the idea that love requires sacrifice. Jung would tell us that behind that tendency to give in, there's an unintegrated shadow, a part of you that's learned to link love with suffering. But here's the truth that can set you free. Love shouldn't hurt, it shouldn't exhaust you, it shouldn't make you feel less than you are. Real love, both toward yourself and others, is expansive. It propels you, nourishes you, lifts you up. Any relationship that constantly drains you, fills you with anxiety, or makes you feel like you have to strive to be loved isn't love. It's a projection of unhealed wounds. And when you understand this, when you stop justifying what deep down you know isn't good for you, that's when real change begins. Many people are afraid to let go. They cling to relationships they know don't benefit them, to dynamics that wear them down, because the emptiness of the unknown seems more terrifying than familiar suffering. But Jung taught us that true transformation only happens when you dare to face that emptiness, when you let go of what's not aligned with you without needing to replace it immediately. If you've surrounded yourself with people who constantly sap your energy, who seem to enjoy putting you down, or who make you feel like you have to prove your worth, it's not a coincidence. It's a reflection of something within you that hasn't yet healed. But the good news is, you can change that dynamic at any moment. You don't need to wait for others to change or for circumstances to be different. The change starts with you, in how you decide to treat yourself, in the boundaries you set, and in how you respond to those around you. When a person truly loves themselves, their energy shifts, and it's palpable. There are no longer cracks for manipulations, false promises, or emotional games to slip through. Not because you become insensitive, but because you now see clearly what you couldn't before. You no longer deceive yourself by justifying behaviors you know deep down aren't healthy. And in that moment, the dark people start stepping away on their own. This doesn't mean you won't face challenges or that suddenly everyone will be perfect, but it does mean your reaction to situations will change. You'll no longer get hooked into destructive dynamics. You'll no longer feel the need to convince anyone of your worth. You'll simply live from your authenticity, and that's enough for everything around you to reorganize. The universe responds to the energy you emit. When you treat yourself with respect and love, you attract situations and people that reflect that, and those who can't sustain themselves in that vibration simply drift away, not because you actively reject them, but because they no longer find in you what they're seeking. This is where another of Jung's key concepts comes into play: projection. What bothers you in others, what irritates you, what makes you react intensely, is often a reflection of something within you that you haven't yet accepted. And the reverse is also true. When you stop having internal conflicts, when you fully accept yourself, the outer world stops presenting situations that reflect those struggles. It's not magic, it's deep psychology. When you love and respect yourself, your unconscious stops projecting lacks and wounds onto others. You no longer attract those who seek to exploit your energy because there's no longer a weak point in you for them to enter. And this is the secret few understand. Real self-love isn't just a matter of self-esteem, it's a matter of internal transformation that reflects in everything around you. The dark people, those who seek control, manipulation, or who simply live in a state of constant negativity, can't sustain themselves in the presence of someone who's freed themselves from their own internal chains. It's as if you're on a different frequency, another level of consciousness. And the most surprising thing is that you don't have to do anything actively to push them away. They'll leave on their own because they can no longer get anything from you. But to reach this point, you need commitment to yourself. You need to be willing to look at yourself without filters, to do the inner work that many avoid because they'd rather distract themselves with the outer world. This process isn't easy, but it's the only path to an authentic and full life. When you decide to love yourself, when you choose to face your shadows instead of running from them, everything starts to change. The right people begin to appear in your life. Not because you're desperately seeking company, but because your energy has shifted in such a way that only those aligned with that vibration can stay by your side. And here comes the question, are you willing to do this work? Are you ready to let go of what no longer serves you and allow yourself to live from your authenticity? Because if you are, I assure you the world you know will change in ways you never imagined. When you start living from a place of authenticity and genuine self-love, the life you know reconfigures in a way that once seemed impossible. It's not just that negative people drift away, it's that everything around you starts aligning with your true self. But for this to happen, it's essential that you understand you can't fool yourself. You can't pretend to be confident when deep down you still doubt your worth. You can't demand respect if internally you keep tolerating the intolerable. The reality you experience is an exact reflection of what you carry inside. Carl Jung taught us that individuation is the process through which a person becomes who they truly are. And here's the key. This process doesn't happen automatically. It requires inner work. It requires you to face those parts of yourself you've been taught to hide, to explore those wounds that have been shaping how you relate to others. And most importantly, it requires you to stop clinging to what no longer belongs to you. Fear of change is one of the reasons many people stay trapped in relationships and situations that don't serve them. They convince themselves that the bad they know is better than the uncertainty, that maybe they're exaggerating, that they should be more patient or understanding. But there's a difference between understanding and self-abandonment. Jung would say that every time you tolerate something that goes against your essence, you're betraying yourself. That betrayal doesn't stay silent. It manifests in dissatisfaction, in anxiety, in that feeling that something's not right even if you can't put it into words. But this is where many make the mistake of seeking the solution outside. They try to change people, to make others value them more, to force things to work without realizing that the real change can only come from within. The day you decide to set boundaries, not because you want to control others, but because you've understood your own worth, is the day everything starts to transform. You no longer attract those who seek to exploit your insecurity. You no longer fall into emotional games or draining relationships. And the best part is, you don't have to give big speeches or justify yourself to anyone. Your energy speaks for you. Self-love isn't proven with words, but with actions, with how you decide to treat yourself, with the relationships you choose to keep and those you choose to leave behind. When you truly understand this, when you realize you don't have to beg for what's already yours by right, everything in your life starts to flow. People who are drawn to others' weakness, insecurity, or lack of boundaries drift away naturally when they sense they can no longer influence you, not because you reject them, but because your frequency has changed. And the same happens with opportunities, with the places where you feel good, with the decisions you make, Everything starts to fit because you're finally living in coherence with who you really are. But here's something important. This process isn't linear. There will be days when you doubt, when you feel tempted to fall back into old patterns, when the fear of loneliness or change makes you question if you're really doing the right thing. And it's in those moments that you need to remember what Jung taught us. Growth only happens when you dare to face the unknown. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about developing a relationship with yourself so strong that you no longer need others to confirm your worth. When you reach this point, the relationships that enter your life are completely different. They're no longer based on need, fear, or emotional dependency. They're relationships where there's mutual respect, where there are no games or manipulations, where you feel free to be yourself without fear of rejection. And the most beautiful thing about all this is that when you become that person who loves and respects themselves, you inspire others to do the same. Because self-love is contagious, not in an arrogant or self-centered way, but in a genuine and profound way. Those who are ready to grow will resonate with you, while those still clinging to destructive dynamics will drift away on their own. This is the true power of truly loving yourself. You don't need to force anything. You don't need to convince anyone to value you. You simply live from your authenticity, and the world responds to that energy. Because when you decide to honor yourself, the entire universe conspires to honor you too. When you start living from a position of genuine self-love, you realize something that wasn't so obvious before. Many of the connections you held on to weren't based on real affinity, but on emotional voids you were trying to fill. Jung spoke of projection as one of the unconscious's most powerful mechanisms, and it's precisely this projection that has led you, on more than one occasion, to connect with people who only reflect the parts of you that you haven't yet worked on. Think of all those relationships that seem destined to fail, those people who seem to consume your energy without giving anything back, the times you found yourself repeating the same patterns with different faces. None of this is a coincidence. Every experience has been an opportunity for you to observe yourself closely, to discover which parts of you have been seeking validation outside when the answer has always been within. When you decide to look at yourself with honesty, you start to notice that many of the dynamics you lived through were the product of an unconscious need for approval. Maybe at some point in your life, you learned that you had to please others to be loved, that love was something earned through sacrifices, or that your worth depended on how much you could give. And this is what Jung would call a conditioning of the psyche, an idea that took root deep in your mind and, without you realizing it, has been guiding your relationships. But the wonderful thing is that you can break free from this at any moment. You can decide that you no longer need to prove anything, that you don't have to carry the responsibility of healing others, that your self-love doesn't depend on how much you can give. And when you make this shift, everything in your life reorganizes. People who once seemed to have power over you stop influencing you, not because they change, but because you do. You no longer react the same way to manipulation. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone to value you. You no longer wear yourself out in one-sided relationships. And as a result, those people who once seemed so present in your life start to fade away, almost as if they were never there. You don't have to do anything to make them leave. You don't have to explain why they no longer fit in your life or justify your growth. You simply become someone who vibrates differently, someone who no longer tunes into the frequency of dependency, sacrifice, or self-sabotage. And this is something that's felt. The dark people, those who feed off others' weakness, can't remain in the presence of someone who's found themselves. It's as if their energy no longer has access to yours, as if they suddenly realize they can no longer influence you. And in that moment, without conflict, without arguments, without unnecessary explanations, they drift away. This is the power of self-love. It's not a shield you use to defend yourself from the world, but an inner light so strong that everything that doesn't resonate with it simply dissolves. And in its place, you start attracting people who are truly aligned with you, situations that nurture your growth, relationships that lift you up instead of wearing you down. But for this to happen, you need to commit to yourself. It's not enough to understand it intellectually. You have to live it in your daily life. You have to be willing to say no when something doesn't resonate with you, to let go without fear of what no longer adds to your life, to give yourself permission to make yourself a priority without guilt. And though it might feel strange at first, with time you realize this is how you should have always lived. Not from the fear of losing others, but from the certainty that those truly meant to walk with you on your path will never ask you to betray yourself. When you reach the point where you truly love and value yourself, you realize that life is no longer about fitting in, seeking acceptance, or settling for what's available. It's about consciously choosing what energy you allow in your space, surrounding yourself with people who contribute, not those who simply take without giving anything back. And the most powerful thing about all this is that it's not something you have to force. It happens naturally when you start living from your truth. The people who used to drain you, who made you doubt your worth, or who seemed to enjoy your insecurities, no longer have a place in your life because there's simply no space for them. Not because you become closed off or distant, but because your energy has become something only those vibrating on your same frequency can sustain. Jung taught us that when we manage to integrate our shadows, when we stop projecting our wounds onto others and take responsibility for our own growth, the world stops presenting us with the same challenges disguised in different forms. And here's the most powerful truth. You don't have to fight for this to happen. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to give speeches about your transformation. You don't have to prove anything. All you need to do is keep working on your inner process. Keep strengthening your relationship with yourself. And stand firm in your decision not to allow anything that isn't aligned with your authenticity. Real self-love isn't selfishness. It's not arrogance. It's not isolation. It's knowing you deserve the best and acting accordingly. It's understanding that your energy is valuable and that you can't waste it on people or situations that aren't in tune with your evolution. And the best part is that when you stay firm in this conviction, life rewards you by bringing to your path exactly what you need. Genuine connections, meaningful opportunities, and a state of inner peace that once seemed unattainable. Now I want you to reflect for a moment. Think of all the times you've betrayed yourself out of fear of losing someone. Think of those situations where you knew something wasn't right but still tolerated it. And now ask yourself, what would happen if you decided to honor yourself above all else? How would your life change if you stopped accepting less than you truly deserve? This is your moment to take the step. Don't wait for circumstances to change. Don't wait for someone to give you permission. Start today, right now, treating yourself with the love and respect you've always sought outside. And I promise you, when you do, everything around you will begin to transform. If this message resonated with you, if something inside you felt it was time to make a change, I invite you to be part of this community. Share this content with someone you know needs it. Leave your comment below telling me which part of the message impacted you the most, and subscribe to keep receiving more reflections that can help you in your process of self-discovery. Your energy is valuable, your time is sacred, and your life deserves to be lived with fullness. So make this the moment you take the first step toward a more authentic existence. See you in the next video, and remember, when you truly love yourself, the entire world changes to reflect that truth.